Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Conscious CEO Experience Facebook Live Friday. This is Rosalind, and I want to welcome you to today's broadcast, which is all about: are you being a boss, or are you being a leader where your real power lies? And this is in alignment with the month of April, which is all about leadership, power, and influence. That's the theme for the month. And I'm just saying hi to all of you that are joining. I'm here live from Vancouver, Canada, where we do have April showers right now. And it's spring, so April showers is just part of what we're experiencing this time of the month. And I want to thank everyone who's tuned in. Last few Facebook Lives, it was all about conscious sales, and I got some great feedback on the mini trainings that I shared there. Definitely, this time is spring, all about springing to life, right? And what better way to really welcome this new season by really looking at where can we be more expressive. That's the energy of the spring, is like coming forth, but then also where can we elevate our leadership, our power and our influence in our businesses, in our careers, and in our lives in general. And so instead of, given a topic is about boss versus leader, and I actually feel, even though this is something that I teach in workshops and in my trainings, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here on the Facebook Live describing to you the differences between a boss and a leader, because that's something that you can actually Google. And Google, does a wonderful job of giving you articles and images that illustrate the differences between a boss and a leader. But today I want to share with you two stories that more illuminate and illustrate really the difference between the two, and what is the impact on not only ourselves or business, but also on our teams. Okay, so here's two stories. My first story is really when I discovered what truly being a leader means in a business or in a professional context. So I remember when I was in university, I was 21 years old, 22 years old, and I had this incredible summer job. It was like my dream job, because I was responsible for organizing this huge orientation program for international students at the University of British Columbia. And the UBC is, a major university here in Canada, but also it's always ranked the top 40 universities around the world. So it's a pretty well-known, prominent university, and it is my alma mater. And I had this dream summer job of organizing orientation programs for international students. And it's no small job, like a lot of students are vying for this position. It's definitely a student. They want a student to have this job, and they want to give them that experience, as well as, they wanted to design programs for students, by students. So here I am coordinating this orientation program that had about half a dozen different components to it. And such a big job, and I remember I had this supervisor who was probably no more than 7 years older than me. She was in her late 20s. And I just remember how chaotic it got 2 weeks before the students were arriving. I mean, there's all this buildup during the summer, anticipating about 1,400 new students coming through, and these are all students from all over the world. These are not domestic students who are maybe already familiar with Vancouver. These are completely fresh off the boat, brand new students that are experiencing Vancouver for the first time, experiencing the university for the first time. And there's so much anticipation and just all of us wanting. I was part of a team that had included, office managers and receptionists, as well as student advisors, so advising on the more academic side of things, and I was responsible for the orientation side of things. And logistically, it just got so chaotic, right? And there's things that needed to be lining up. We were liaising with the airport, the different faculties to make sure, we have all the information accurate. We're creating these welcome packages, and we're trying to coordinate communication. A lot of just juggling a lot of balls in the air. The stress of it, although obviously, it's manageable for a human being, it was a lot for someone like myself who'd never done had this much responsibility before. I was responsible for everything running smoothly and everything essentially getting done. And I just remember one day, there were, a number of things that just didn't line up that day. I was having a bad day at work. I would have taken a bad hair day any day than have that day at work. It was a terrible, terrible day. And I remember something went wrong logistically, and it caused this domino effect that created problems that I needed my supervisor to handle because it was beyond myself. And I remember sitting on this meeting and her being, understandably quite frustrated, and just, having to problem solve this situation that I found myself in. And I could feel her frustration, and I could feel how, because she also had her share of stress, right? Because her being a supervisor, managing this portfolio, which I was responsible for, then whatever hiccup that I was experiencing, she was responsible for. And in that moment, she expressed her frustration, maybe in a way that was not terribly respectful, and maybe I don't even remember what happened, literally what happened, but I just remember feeling like someone who, had tried her best, and I had, it didn't line up perfectly 100%, and maybe there was a couple of balls that got dropped, and, I was already feeling bad about myself, and she had a response that added to that feeling of disappointment and failure within myself. And in that moment, I wasn't aware, being 21, 22, I wasn't aware of, the rules really, of the professional environment. I was just learning. And I remember I teared up because of, the stress and having tried my best, and I didn't want to let her down. So I teared up right in our meeting. And I probably I shed a tear or two, it went down my cheeks, and I just allowed myself to have this emotion. But I also was so mindful. I'm like, wow, there was a part of me that knew maybe this is not the most professional thing to cry in front of your boss, right? And she didn't say anything about this episode of me crying in front of my boss, but out of frustration and out of stress. Sometimes when we're stressed, crying is just a natural way for our bodies to release the stress. And so there I was crying because I was overstressed and overstretched, and we had a problem. And what she said, in a very straight face way. She didn't acknowledge the crying. She didn't try to comfort me. She didn't give me Kleenex or anything. But what she said was, well, it looks like you had a pretty hard day. So why don't you go home early? It was after lunch. It was 1 or something, shortly after lunch. Why don't you go home early and get some rest, and tomorrow morning we'll meet at 9 a.m. and we'll figure out how to solve this problem. And I sat there stunned and going, okay. Even though there's a huge part of me that just wanted to fix it right then and there, she encouraged me to go home and de-stress, right? And the next day, of course, I showed up for the meeting and we did manage to problem solve the situation. And you know what she said to me after the fact, perhaps a couple of days later, as she said, thank you. She actually thanked me. Here I was thinking, gosh, like, I'm not gonna pull this off, right? And there was my boss thanking me for making her a better leader. And what did she mean by that? What she meant was, by me showing her how her words and her demeanor and her energy landed on me, and what the emotional impact was, she was able to make a better decision, maybe a different decision, how to handle the situation. So it was that real-time feedback that she was getting from me in a situation where normally people would shut down or maybe have an outburst or start to finger point, how we like to basically just jump out of ourselves and start to play the blame game, and like do all sorts of reactive things. But in her experience, even though the situation was stressful, and it was not fun at all, something did go wrong, that there was a way to respond to it rather than to react to it. And that as my boss, she related to me on a human level, right? She did not necessarily make me feel wrong or stop my tears or anything like that. She didn't encourage me to cry more, for sure, right? Because it was uncomfortable. But then at the same time, she took that opportunity to see how she can be a better supervisor. And she thanked me for that opportunity. And, me being 21, 22, this is, one of my first sort of big jobs that I had, apart from making websites and, working in retail. I was completely just stunned. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is the kind of boss that I want to be. Right? Or this is the kind of leader that I want to be. And looking back, I realized it was my very, very first lesson on leadership and how leadership is very different. So being a leader is very different from being a boss, right? Conversely, I have another story to share. That's going to be a shorter version because probably know what's going to come, is that, many years down the road, probably a decade later, I had a business partner, and she and I were running a company in international trade, and she had a more dominant personality. So she was a CEO and I was a COO, and we're just another day in business as usual, trying to close some sales and trying to fulfill some orders and doing some business development. Just another day. With problems, with issues, not everything is perfect. And I recall an experience where something went wrong and it was a completely different scenario, right? It was the opposite. So she was approaching the situation like a boss, right? Focusing on what went wrong and focusing on who's to blame and focusing on all these things that were possibly understandably task oriented, right? It's like, let's fix this or let's figure this out, but without taking into account the human element and the emotional element. So really the difference between being a boss and being a leader is seeing where you can show up and how you're showing up and being responsible for your energy, right? Even if you are someone who's not completely comfortable with, say, emotions in the workplace, or you feel like, gee, I could really use some emotional intelligence training. You don't have to be perfect in this aspect. And you don't have to be, you know, Mother Teresa or Oprah or anyone like that who is, you know, completely tap in and can be really fluent in that emotional language. But even if you're someone who is not terribly emotional, you can show up in such a way that, you know, is not reactive, right? And really just responding to the situation and keeping in mind, you know, connecting back to your heart and being so aware, almost like moment by moment, you know, what's the best response to this situation right now, you know, and one of the strategies that I like to use is, you know, is this response something that I'm going to be proud of, or is it something that I'm going to regret? And that usually determines, you know, how I want to respond, right? So obviously it's been over a decade since that experience with one of my first bosses. She really taught me what it means to be not just a boss, but be a leader who embraces people, who embraces learning, who embraces growth, who embraces mistakes and failures, and in fact encourages that, you know, within the team and within the company, because that's how you learn. You know, have you ever had a boss that expected perfection out of you? That's just completely unrealistic, you know, where it doesn't really exist. Perfection does not exist. Perfection is in where you get it wrong and where you get things right, and when you're learning and when you fall down and where you can get back up, right? So yeah, as I'm sharing, I'm really wanting to sort of tie this back to you, and more specifically, you know, what experiences have you had where you had such clear distinction, you know, whether it's yourself within your own growth, maybe you were more inclined to being a boss at one time in your career or in your business journey, and then you start to shift more towards a leader. So I'm really curious. You can leave a comment below, or send me a message, email, and let me know. And here's the thing. I want to shift the conversation now to power, because we live in a society currently that equates power with being a boss. If you've spent any time on Instagram or even Facebook or LinkedIn or you know, on social media, or even if you're just hanging out around the water cooler, you probably notice the expression boss thrown out quite a bit as, you know, something really glamorous, and, you know, why don't you become a boss, and, you know, like a boss, and with a crown and everything. I don't have a crown today, but you get the idea. And my intention really is to not say that being a boss is somehow wrong or is less than, you know, that being a leader is better than being a boss, because at the end of the day, you know, we all need still bosses. Bosses generally tend to be the people who make sure things get done no matter what, and they tend to just, you know, be cracking the whip and driving things forward, moving things forward. They tend to make really great managers, making sure that the engine is moving forward and not letting the ball drop, typically. Managers these days still have to have leadership qualities, in my opinion. But there's just a sense of, you know, to be powerful, you have to be bossy. And I just have to ask, like, where does that come from? You know? And I really can't give you the answer, because, you know, historically, I mean, we don't really need a history lesson. We all know what's gone on with the workplace, and from the we used to be in farming sort of economy where people worked land and we made food that way, and then we shifted to more industrial economy where we started manufacturing things, and then, you know, we started to create capitalism, and that became the dominant model for us to work and exchange value. And so bosses are completely, you know, normal and necessary. You know, imagine you work in a factory, right? You got to get things done. My sense is the shift now in where the real power is has to do with not simply about getting things done, which is essential, but really being able to show up in a certain way and being able to be conscious, managing your energy in a certain way, just like my very first supervisor, boss showed me. Such a potent example of that. And more importantly, taking what has been hard and what has been really challenging, taking the problems, right? See, what differentiates a boss from a leader is a boss looks at the problem and goes, like, how can we fix it, right? Which is legitimate. Sometimes you have to do that. Whereas the leader looks at the problem and goes, how can this be an opportunity for growth? How can, like, what is this telling me about where I've taken responsibility and where I've not taken responsibility, and empowering those around them to do the same, right? And embracing the sort of, you could say, the mess, right? If there's a mess in your company or in your business, you know, put on your leadership hat and just really, really look at it and just show up for what it could teach you, and not having your blinders on or sticking your head in the sand. So in my opinion, that's true leadership, and that's where your power is. You know, in another Facebook Live video, I'll probably yes, I will share a story of when transformation, either my own story or a client story of taking something that was really messy and really chaotic and very problematic and turning it around, and that's really where your power comes from, you know, not kind of like from this, although we all like to feel like this, like Wonder Woman, right? I was trying to find a book this morning, going through my library, and wanting to find a book that captures the spirit of what I really want to convey in this broadcast. And what came through was this book that I read last year, in the fall of last year, and it's called Sacred Success. It's by a woman named Barbara Stanny. And Barbara Stanny writes about money. She's mostly a financial thought leader. And I have a lot of respect for her because she's a different voice in the spaces where money, you know, is only written about and sort of spoken about in this like very little terms, you know, like with the stock market and now, I mean, there's other ways to conceptualize money, including Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. But she writes about money, and she also writes about power. And so when we're in business, you know, business, if you're doing something and you're not trying to make money out of it, it's probably not a business. But if you're up to something and you're trying to make money, and you're probably in a business. And power is typically measured in business. One way to measure it is how much money you can generate through your business. And so the gist of the book is really about redefining power, right? And this is where I want to tie in leadership, because in it she speaks about how power, we have this old way of sort of thinking about power as muscle and like power over and dominating and if I may use the expression, like bossing, right? Being a boss, bossing people around, bossing ourselves around, how many of us have that, self-talk, that we even, we become our own boss, and then we end up being, our worst boss, right? So hard on ourselves. And in it, she writes about redefining power and how that could be a basis for sacred success, which is essentially a more holistic definition of success that does not equate to burnout or abuse of power, abuse of the planet, abuse of our health. And so I'm gonna wrap up on this note, and it's really a quote from the book, and it's on page 12 in case you want to get the book and you want to reference it. And in the book, she actually quotes Oprah Winfrey, and the quote starts, "The path to my success was never about attaining incredible wealth or celebrity. It was about the process of continually seeking to be better, challenging myself to pursue excellence on every level. And the whole point of being alive is to evolve into the complete person you were intended to be. When you view power from that angle, you begin to understand our resistance more clearly. Or sometimes it's sort of our misguided lessons about how to be powerful, or how to be a boss. So essentially, claiming a power is about becoming who we really are. It's from the choices that we make, choices that reflect who we are, choices that accelerate our growth, and distinguishing what's true for us versus what's been artificially imposed. Right. So true power, here we go. True power is being true to yourself and finding your voice and path in the world. So I have to admit, I like this definition of power because it's something that I feel the world needs to hear more of, as opposed to the old messages of power that we receive about being dominant, or always being perfect, or being so hard on our bodies and on ourselves, and sacrificing our health and relationships in order to attain that sort of, whatever version of success that we've been brainwashed to believe that, this is what it looks like. And real power, to me, as Barbara says, is really about making a choice about how you show up and being true to your values. So if you value growth and learning, and if you value your people, value your team, show up as that, and don't pretend to be someone else that you're not. Don't pretend to boss people around or be a boss or be powerful that way. Like, those things, are just, can be, you can perform it for a while. It can feel really performative, and it can feel really glamorous. But at the end of the day, it's not gonna really connect you to the substance of what you're here to do and who you're meant to connect. And just remember, when you are faced with a problem that involves a team member, remember the impact that you might have on them, depending on how you react. If I had not had that lesson with my very first boss, I probably would not have laid the brick and the foundation for my values now, and the basis of, a lot of what I teach today, right? She's been such an instrumental part of my growth. And so be that leader, even if you're in a bossy kind of position, right? Even if you have to have boss elements to what you do. Strive to show up more as a leader, and I can guarantee you will benefit, your team will benefit, and your business and your bottom line will benefit as a result of it. So that's all I have to share for today. And until next time, before I go to my usual ending message, just realize that it's almost mid-April, and a couple of quick changes. So there will be no live workshop this month, but there will be a webinar. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, I believe in you, and I believe that you can create extraordinary success on your own terms and from the inside up. Bye for now.